For 30 years, they were called the Asian miracle, the fastest-growing economies the world had ever seen, rising out of poverty into gleaming glass and steel. Then, in the summer of 1997, it came apart. It began with a single currency, in a single country. Within months it had spread like a virus across an entire continent, erasing hundreds of billions of dollars, toppling a 30-year dictatorship, throwing tens of millions of people back into poverty, and pushing the whole global financial system to the edge of collapse. This is the story of how the most celebrated economies on earth, nations the whole world was told to copy, collapsed almost overnight. How a mountain of borrowed American dollars, a handful of overconfident governments, and a single crack in a currency called the Thai baht set off a chain reaction that no one could stop. And how, when the smoke cleared, the idea of the perfect economy lay in ruins. To understand the fall, you have to see how high they had climbed. Thailand, South Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, the world called them the tiger economies. For a generation they grew at 7, 8, 9% a year, decade after decade. Rice farmers became factory workers. Villages became cities. Skylines that had been flat exploded upward with cranes and towers. It was, the experts agreed, a miracle, and the 21st century, they said, would belong to Asia. And the money agreed. From New York, Tokyo and London, foreign investors poured a tidal wave of capital into the region, desperate for a piece of the fastest growth on the planet. Banks lent freely. Factories multiplied. Fortunes were made on paper every single day. To the world, Asia looked like the safest bet there was, a one-way road, always upward. Almost no one stopped to ask what the whole miracle was quietly standing on. There was even a philosophy to it. Politicians and economists spoke proudly of Asian values, the idea that hard work, strong families and firm governments had unlocked a better, faster kind of capitalism than the tired Old West could manage. Business books celebrated it. Investors repeated it like a prayer. The confidence was absolute. And absolute confidence, in finance, is almost always the most dangerous moment of all. Because underneath the glass and steel, 3 quiet time bombs were ticking. The first, to keep foreign investors calm, countries like Thailand had pinned their currencies to the US dollar, a fixed rate that never moved, a promise that the baht was as good as dollars. It made everyone feel safe. It also meant that if the promise ever broke, it would break all at once. The second bomb was the debt. Because the peg made dollars feel safe, Asian companies borrowed enormous sums in US dollars, cheap, easy, foreign money, and spent it at home. As long as the exchange rate held, it was almost free. But every one of those loans carried a hidden trapdoor. If the local currency ever fell against the dollar, the debt would suddenly cost far more to repay, overnight, and with no warning. And the third bomb was the bubble. All that borrowed money had to go somewhere, so it flooded into property and the stock market. Bangkok sprouted a forest of skyscrapers, many of them half empty before they were even finished. Prices soared far beyond anything real demand could justify. It was a classic bubble, inflating on foreign credit. And by early 1997, in Thailand, the air had quietly started to leak out. And a fourth weakness was woven through all the others, how the money was lent. Across the region, loans often flowed not to the best ideas but to the best connected, the relatives, friends and allies of those in power. Banks poured money into sprawling conglomerates, assuming the government would never let them fail. It was capitalism without consequences. And it meant that when the reckoning finally came, the rot was not in one corner. It was everywhere, all at once. The cracks showed first in Thailand. Exports slowed. Those gleaming towers stood empty. Property companies began to default, and the banks that had lent to them filled up with bad loans that would never be repaid. Quietly, the smartest money in the world began to suspect the truth, that the Thai baht was not really worth what the government promised, and that the peg to the dollar could not hold. And so the speculators came. Giant international funds began betting, in enormous size, that the baht would fall, attacking the currency, forcing the issue. Thailand's central bank fought back the only way it could, by spending its precious reserves of foreign dollars to buy up its own currency and defend the magic number. For weeks it burned through billions, draining the national treasury to hold a line that everyone could see was breaking. Then, on the 2nd of July, 1997, Thailand gave up. Out of reserves and out of options, the government let go of the baht and allowed it to float, to find its own value on the open market. The result was instant and brutal. The currency didn't drift. It fell off a cliff, losing a fifth of its value in a day, and half of it within months. The promise that the baht was as good as dollars had been broken, and now the trapdoor opened. For every Thai company that had borrowed in dollars, it was a death sentence. Their debts, measured in baht, had just doubled, while their income, earned in baht, had collapsed. Perfectly healthy businesses were bankrupt in a matter of days, through no fault of their own, simply because a number on a screen had moved. Factories closed. Banks failed. And the panic that had taken down one currency began, hungrily, to look for its next victim. What happened next had a name the newspapers loved: the Asian flu. Terrified foreign investors, having been burned in Thailand, stopped asking which country was actually in trouble, and simply began pulling their money out of the entire region, all at once. If the baht could fall, they reasoned, so could the rest. The panic was no longer about facts. It was pure contagion, spreading from market to market at the speed of a phone call. The Philippines. Malaysia. And then, catastrophically, Indonesia, the fourth most populous nation on earth. Its currency, the rupiah, did not just fall, it disintegrated, losing around 80% of its value. A lifetime of savings became worthless in weeks. Imported food and medicine tripled in price. In a country of 200 million people, a financial number on a trading screen was turning, very fast, into hunger. And then the contagion did the unthinkable, it reached South Korea. This was no small economy. Korea was an industrial giant, the 11th largest economy in the world, home to Samsung, Hyundai, and Daewoo. It was supposed to be untouchable. But its great companies were buried in dollar debt too, and by December 1997 the nation was days away from running out of foreign currency entirely. The country of the miracle was staring at national bankruptcy. What the Korean people did next, the world never forgot. To help their bankrupt country repay its foreign debts, ordinary Koreans lined up by the millions to donate their own gold, wedding rings, medals, heirlooms, baby trinkets, melting down the most precious things they owned to save the nation. It was moving, and it was heartbreaking. And it was nowhere near enough to fill a hole that deep. Not every domino fell. Hong Kong, with its vast reserves and its own peg to the dollar, was hit again and again, its stock market plunging as speculators tested it too. But Hong Kong, unlike Thailand, had the firepower to fight back, and it spent staggering sums to hold the line. It survived. But the message was terrifyingly clear: no one in Asia was truly safe, and even the strongest only survived by burning fortunes to do it. Behind every falling currency was a human catastrophe that the numbers could never capture. Across the region, tens of millions of people were thrown out of work and back into poverty in a matter of months. Life savings evaporated. Family businesses built over generations vanished. Students were pulled out of school, the sick went untreated. The miracle had lifted a continent up, and now, just as quickly, it dropped it. Nowhere is that frozen moment more visible than here, in Bangkok. When the money stopped, construction simply stopped with it, leaving a skyline of half-built concrete skeletons, towers abandoned in mid-air, cranes rusting where they stood. This one, the Sathorn Unique, was to be a luxury address. Instead it became the most famous of Thailand's ghost towers, a giant grey tombstone for the boom that died. For ordinary families, the fall was measured in small, devastating things. A father with a steady factory job in June, and nothing by September. A shopkeeper watching the price of imported rice double, then triple, while the customers simply stopped coming. Across the region, suicides rose. This was the true face of the crisis, not the trading screens and the falling graphs, but the millions of quiet, private ruins hidden beneath them. In Indonesia, the collapse turned political, and then violent. As prices soared and jobs vanished, anger exploded onto the streets. Riots tore through Jakarta in May 1998. And after 31 years in absolute power, President Suharto, a dictator who had ruled Indonesia for a generation, was swept away, forced to resign by the economic wreckage. A financial crisis had done what no opposition ever could, it had brought down a regime. Add it all together, and the scale is staggering. Trillions of dollars in wealth, wiped out. Currencies cut in half or worse. Millions of businesses destroyed. An entire generation's climb out of poverty, reversed in a single year. This was not a war and not a natural disaster. It was a financial crisis, and it hit like both. With whole nations on the edge of default, there was only one place left to turn, the International Monetary Fund, the world's lender of last resort. And the IMF came, with the largest rescue packages it had ever assembled, around $17 billion for Thailand, $40 billion for Indonesia, and a staggering $58 billion for South Korea, at the time, the biggest financial bailout in the history of the world. But the rescue came with a price, and the price was harsh. In return for the money, the IMF demanded brutal conditions, slash government spending, raise interest rates to the sky, close failing banks, and throw the economies open to foreign ownership. To its supporters, it was necessary medicine. To millions of Asians, it felt like a foreign institution kicking them while they were down, deepening the recession, and dictating terms to proud, sovereign nations. There is one photograph from those months that the region has never forgiven. It shows the head of the IMF standing over the seated president of Indonesia, arms folded, watching as the old man signs away his country's economic independence. To the West it was a rescue. To much of Asia it was humiliation, captured in a single frame, and it lit a resentment that still burns in the region's politics today. Some fought back with words. Malaysia's fiery Prime Minister, Mahathir Mohamad, publicly blamed the whole disaster on foreign speculators, naming the billionaire financier George Soros, and calling currency trading immoral. Soros and the speculators fired back that they had only exposed a rot the governments themselves had allowed to grow. Both sides had a point. The speculators lit the match, but Asia had spent years soaking the house in petrol. Asia drew a hard lesson from its humiliation. In the years that followed, country after country did the same thing. They stopped relying on the kindness of foreign money and began hoarding vast war chests of their own dollar reserves, so that no IMF would ever again dictate their terms. It made them far safer. It also helped flood the world with cheap savings, money that would go looking for a home, and help inflate the next great bubble, in America, 10 years later. And here is the part most people forget, it did not stay in Asia. The shockwave rolled outward across the entire globe. In 1998, a weakened, panicking world economy helped push Russia into defaulting on its own debt. And that Russian default, in turn, was the spark that blew up an American hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management, and nearly took Wall Street down with it. One crack in the Thai baht had, in the end, shaken the whole world. Slowly, painfully, Asia recovered. By 1999 and 2000, growth returned, the tigers roared again, though quieter and more scarred than before. They rebuilt their reserves, let their currencies float, and swore never to be so exposed again. But the lost savings never came back. The people who fell into poverty did not all climb out. And the towering ghost buildings still stand in Bangkok, decades later, as monuments to how fast a miracle can die. So what was the real lesson of 1997? That the Asian miracle was never magic. It was built on a dangerous foundation, a flood of foreign dollars, currencies pegged to a promise that could not last, and a shared belief that the good times would simply never end. When enough people believe a thing is safe, they stop being careful with it. And that, not any single speculator, is what truly broke the tigers. And it is a lesson the world keeps having to relearn. Pegged currencies, mountains of foreign debt, bubbles inflating on cheap money, and everyone insisting this time is different, the ingredients never really change. So here is the question I'll leave you with: was the Asian financial crisis caused by greedy foreign speculators, or by the nations that left themselves wide open to them? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe, because on this channel, the ledger always comes due.